Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our Public Sector Catering Plant-Based Week webinar. We're in the middle of a very busy week of information and sharing, which I'm sure you've seen, and David and we'll be sharing and telling you a little bit more about it towards the end, where you can find more information and have a look at what we've been up to. But today is all about making the transition to more sustainable menus, and we've got a great panel of people joining, David. We'll just give it a couple of minutes, a couple of more seconds for people to log in. We seem to have slowed down, so I'm sure people will drift in over the course of the next few minutes. So, David, over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Good afternoon. I'm David Fode, editor of Public Sector Catering magazine, and thank you for joining us for our Plant-Based Week 2023 webinar. The theme, as Andrew said, is making the transition to a more sustainable menu. And what do we mean by that? We know that caterers now routinely offer menus that have plant-based options on them. Meat-free Mondays, for example, is become fairly common in schools. Hospital menus have definitely turned a bit greener than they were a few years ago. And if you think about the Gen Z interest in health and the environment, then universities have a fairly easy job of it. They're probably pushing at a bit of an open door. But is that enough? Dietary advice is still that we need to be eating more fruit and vegetables. And it's clear that the food choices that we make have a role to play in achieving net zero goals, because a more plant-based diet is generally regarded as more sustainable. So then what should public sector caterers be doing about it? Well, that's why we've got our panel of experts here today to offer some insight into these issues and more. So let's meet them. And there they are, all coming online as if on cue. Richard. Yeah, we've got Richard McIlwain, Chief Executive of the Vegetarian Society, whose organisation is currently in the middle of its own National Vegetarian Week. So good afternoon, Richard.
Hi, David. How are we doing?
Well, fine, thank you. We've also got Moussa Haddad, Vegetarian for Life's Head of Research and Policy. Hello, Moussa. You are muted at the moment, Moussa.
Hi, sorry about that.
That's okay. We have Tony Mulgrew, the pioneering chef at award-winning Ravenscliffe School. Hi, Tony.
Good afternoon, David.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us. We've got Claire Ogley, Head of Campaigns and Research with the Vegan Society, who's also here. Hello, Claire.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And we've got Colette Fox, who heads ProVeg UK's School Plates programme. Thank you for joining us, Colette.
Thanks for having me too.
Okay. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and offer a few initial thoughts about the work they do and trends in plant-based food. After that, we plan to tackle a few of the practical issues that caterers face and how that affects their ability to expand their plant-based options on their menus. We are then hoping to be able to take some questions from you. You can post one at any time. Just use the Q&A function. Please include your name and company if you can. If you just want to comment as the webinar progresses, then get involved using the chat function, remembering to use the option to all panelists and attendees. So, Richard, over to you to get us underway, please.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, David. So, yeah, I'm delighted to be here. I lead the Vegetarian Society with the world's oldest campaigning vegetarian organisation. We campaign on behalf of vegetarians and vegans, but I think increasingly, I'm sure like most people interested in the 90% of people who are still in some form eating meat for all those reasons that you articulated in your intro, David. You know, we have a climate crisis, we have a biodiversity crisis, we have a health crisis. And I think most people here would agree that certainly plant-based or plant-forward meals are one way that we can push back across all three of those issues, which sort of intersect. It's also National Vegetarian Week, so it's our annual big showpiece campaign. Got thousands of people signing up around the country. Delighted that we could join forces with Public Sector Catering's Plant-Based Week as well, which is just happened to be running at the same time. So it made perfect sense to join up and sort of cross-promote our messages. And as well as a campaigning organisation works on policy and so on, we also operate our own cookery school. So we have a team of chefs headed up by the wonderful Sam Platt. And we're not just about teaching members of the public to cook. We also work with professional chefs. We work with the NHS last year and local authorities and schools to not just introduce the concepts of vegetarian and plant-based eating, but to actually teach the skills involved, particularly at a catering level when you're cooking for tens and hundreds of people. And in terms of trends, well, you know, nobody can have ignored the rise of the plant-based aisle in the supermarket. You know, bit by bit, it's becoming more normal. You don't have to visit your health food store anymore to get great plant-based meals. But from a public sector point of view, I don't know if you saw the announcement, I think it was today, Compass Group looking to decarbonise across their range, 180 million meals. And I think increasingly, the idea of low carbon food, which intersects brilliantly with plant-based and some of the sort of lower fat vegetarian foods, is one intersection that I think we can really leap on. So, you know, National Vegetarian Week is deliberately themed on a climate change message. We're working with a whole host of local authorities around the country and other public sector bodies, including businesses. Because I think, to a certain extent, whilst, you know, I'm a huge advocate for animal ethics, I think climate is one thing we can agree on that we need to do something about. And while most people may feel powerless in terms of not being able to choose who their energy provider is or what car they drive, you can choose to change the food you eat. And I think the public sector has a whole role, a huge role to play in that. And I've probably said enough there, so I'll move on.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. Moussa, can I come to you next?
Yep, sure. And I've unmuted myself this time. So we are so I work for Vegetarian for Life. We've been around in one form or another since the 60s, and we are the UK's charity for older vegans and vegetarians. We particularly focus on the UK care sector, and we have a range of services that are targeted at that sector. And we've grown to the extent that we have around 1,600 care establishments as members, which is around a sixth of the UK care sector. So, for example, we we offer bespoke caterer training to help kind of make practical for care establishments the things we're talking about. I think we come from a sort of maybe a particular perspective, which is that we are about kind of protecting the rights of older vegans and vegetarians to have their deeply held beliefs respected. And, you know, that's obviously kind of manifest mostly through diet and the food they eat. So we're kind of fairly agnostic as to the reasons for that diet, but it's clear that if we want to encourage care establishments to take more seriously the kind of needs, the deeply held needs of their vegan and vegetarian residents, then we need to kind of work. We do better if we work with the grain of the things that they're doing already. So clearly they have sustainability targets and goals, and you know, as Richard said, switching to a plant-based diet is one very kind of straightforward way of helping to achieve those goals. So, you know, if we can kind of marry up with that agenda, even though our kind of starting point is slightly different, it's about the kind of rights and dignity of particular residents, you know, I think that's really, really helpful for us. So one of the things we're doing this autumn is we're producing a sustainability guide for the UK care sector, which is going to kind of help them to understand how to cater better for vegans and vegetarians, but also to kind of look at the kind of carbon metrics associated with particular recipes so that they can kind of really understand the extent to which these shifts will help kind of them meet their sustainability goals, but actually it will also help them to become more accustomed to catering in a way that suits the people that we represent. In terms of kind of evidence and trends, I think it's fair to say that veganism is kind of seen as more of a young person's thing. I mean, the growth has been kind of, eye-watering in the last decade or so. But actually, what we see is there's significant growth in the older population as well. So we do a survey every 5 years, a representative survey of the UK care sector. The next one's due next year. And in the most recent one, we found 167% increase in the number of vegan care residents. And I would anticipate that that's either going to continue or accelerate in the next time round. And there are kind of a few little tidbits of information. The British Social Attitudes Survey found that older people were actually twice as likely to reduce their meat consumption as younger people. So there's actually, within the kind of the idea of plant-based, there's more of this gradation. So there's reduction, obviously, and then there's kind of commitment to particular diet. So I think, we are looking for more evidence on this. So we're in the process of commissioning some work, kind of modeling future trends in vegans and vegetarians within care settings. So hopefully we'll know more soon. But at the moment, one of the things we are trying to kind of educate the care sector on is that even if they may not have so many guests at the moment who are vegan or vegetarian, that number is likely to grow in the future. And I think the more we can talk in terms of other agendas that plant-based food hit, then the more we can kind of achieve change. So that's kind of where we fit into this debate, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. Of the 4 organisations we've got represented here today, I believe you all run training programs for chefs and the general public as well. But Tony, you are a caterer who's just gone out there and done it yourself anyway. So give us some of your initial thoughts.
Good afternoon, everyone. With myself being in catering for more years than I'd like to remember, I came into education catering in 2001. So there was lots of changing starting to happen. By 2008, certainly up in Yorkshire in Calderdale area, the local authority catering provider was dwindling from providing all the schools in Calderdale to more and more schools going in-house. And with me being one of the first in-house caterers, it was left to my own devices really to introduce any new concepts. So I was in a mainstream secondary school at the time with 850 students and 1 hot plate and 45 minutes to produce the meals for all those students. So the first thing was, how do we get all these students through the hot plate as quickly as possible and give them a meal that they're going to appreciate and perhaps encourage looking at different options of food that we were offering. So it was important to me to straight away split that hot plate up into different areas. So we put on salad bars, jacket potato bars, pasta bars, what we called the 5 pick and mix. So it was sandwiches with snacks and what have you that people could grab and go. And the first thing that I noticed was students will quickly adapt if you put things that they see on the high street that looks familiar. So being able to introduce nowadays is quite common, pasta pots. Now we were making all our own fresh tomato sauces and adding our own other vegetarian options or meat options. The same with paninis. We got the students to write recipes. So one of the most popular paninis was pesto with roasted peppers and cheese. So things like that worked really well. 12 years down the line, Incredible Edible Todmorden, great success, growing, cooking at a local community level, business level, and education level. Great success, went global, and then I was asked to move to where I am now, Ravenscliffe High School, SEN school, which meant starting all over again because they were going from local authority to in-house. And having such an array of allergen diets, intolerances at this present moment, I think we've got about 41 special diets. So we're looking at gluten-free, maize-free, you name it, everything's free with these diets. So it isn't as easy for me as a caterer to go to my suppliers and say, can I have a vegetarian or vegan option that would suit our students? And this is why you'll see that I produce recipes with other chefs that have been involved in with best practice at a global level that basically are vegetables, and we produce everything as fresh as possible. So we know exactly what's going into those recipes so that we can offer them on the hot plate to our students as the main option, but it covers all our allergen students as well. So it makes life a little bit easier for ourselves. And then, of course, like most schools nowadays with the meat-free, we've been working with the Vegetarian Society in the past, where most of our menu is 82% meat-free. We've always carried that out. Meat-free Mondays, we always offer a vegetarian or vegan choice as the first option on the hot plate. And the fact that we're offering so many vegetarian and vegan options, it gives us the option yet again to think about the supply and sourcing of quality meat for those days that we offer meat. And so far it seems to work. Like anything in schools, you have to basically carry on and keep persuading students to take better, healthier options. We always offer 2 vegetables with whatever meal we're offering. We get as much of our fresh produce from the school polytunnel that the students grow themselves. So that connection between where food comes from and bringing it to the kitchen for it to be cooked and seeing it on the hot plate, it actually resonates throughout the school that every student knows at some point throughout the curriculum will be planting seeds to grow and sell in their little enterprises. But any excess is coming into the kitchen. I'm cooking with it, and they can see that. So
sounds like you've developed a little bit of a winning formula there, Tony, and it's very interesting to hear.
I wouldn't say a winning formula because we're always having to look at other ways. And that's the thing about school food. You cannot have this tunnel vision. You have to be flexible and be able to change and to be able to follow the trends, whether it be vegetarian or vegan, and give those choices and those options.
Yeah, okay, I understand. Claire, could we come to you now?
Yes, thanks, David. I just want to say this is a great conversation to be having at this point, and very timely with, I'm sure everyone will have seen the news today that the world will likely breach the 1.3 degrees warming target. So I think it's just important now to have a conversation about how catering can play into that, and how food is a really large part of our the areas where we can reduce our environmental impact. So yeah, I'm Claire Oakley. I'm the head of campaigns, policy and research at the Vegan Society. So we help people go vegan and stay vegan, and we do that through big public facing behavior change campaigns, and then also through targeting policymakers and trying to change policy on a kind of structural systemic level as well. So one of our big campaigns is called Catering for Everyone, and it's aimed at the public sector, with a call for at least one vegan option on every public sector menu as standard. So that's our big ask with it. Obviously, a lot of people are going much further than that, but we're aiming to have that from a vegan perspective. And we'll be doing a lot of work engaging with councils later this year to kind of push that message and improve options for vegans. Our in-house dietitians have also done quite a lot of work with the prisons catering services to improve vegan menus there. So we've got kind of a lot of practical experience on creating vegan menus on a very tight budget in that area as well. So it's something we're really aware of. In terms of your question about trends, I would also pick up that point earlier that we're seeing a real demographic shift. So it's not just a trend, it's a kind of overall shift. Our research has shown that people under 35 are, I think it's about 6 times more likely to be vegan than those over 65. And with that trend increasing, it's going to consolidate. That's what we're seeing. So we're going to end up with much more demand. And I'd also make the point that it's not just vegans and vegetarians. I think consistently about 30% of people tell us that they are actively trying to reduce their meat consumption. So there's that market or that kind of demand there as well. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you very much. And Colette.
Hi, thank you. So I'm Paulette Fox. I head up ProVeg UK's School Plates programme. We're probably the newest kids on the block in this group. We've been running our programme for just 5 years. I'm a plant-based nutritionist and extremely passionate about children's health and planetary health. So just so you have a sense of where I'm coming from. So the School Plates programme, we're essentially a team of nutritionists and chefs, and we review menus of all schools. We create plant-based recipes. We do that in collaboration with school caterers so that we're providing them with what they want and what's popular and what they need, how they can turn their popular dishes into plant-based versions. We also run online and in-person plant-based training for caterers. So we have those every month, the online sessions, and we go out and train really to just inspire school caterers about plant-based food, why it's so important, that it, address all of their concerns, because often there are lots of concerns that it will be not very tasty, it will be expensive, it won't give children the nutrients they need. So we kind of start off by listening to all their concerns and then work with them through our sessions to really gently get them on board and inspire them by getting them cooking the food and eating it at lunchtime, and then having another discussion about what do they think about it all now. So we've also launched our School Plates Awards at the beginning of this year, which essentially is putting our 23 evidence-based actions into a checklist, and that is going absolutely through the roof. We have, I think, had 7 bronze awards so far, 2 silvers, and about to announce our first golds, which is better than we expected to get even by the end of this year. So it's just really, a huge incentive to drive those little nudges forward, whatever that is, whether it's tweaking the language, tweaking the recipes, the positioning of dishes on menus, all of these evidence-based actions. And in terms of trends, I mean, hopefully this isn't a trend. This is just going one way now, from what I can see. As Claire said, we're not on target to hit these, global warming measures that have been set. I can just speak from my experience with school caterers. I joined ProVeg just over 2 years ago, and we had just over 10 multi-academy trusts and councils, local authorities that we were supporting. That's now over 80 in 2 years. We were very much going to them, asking them, can we help you? Can we help you reduce your emissions, get your school food healthier? And it's completely flipped. And I can just see in the short time I've been doing this, the pace accelerating, and more every day we're being approached, can you help us? So there is just a huge demand to do this. Councils, all school caterers, private caterers, individual schools know this is what they need to do, and they just need a bit of help to get started.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you very much. I wanted to first of all pick up, Claire, on the point that you made about the sort of the global warming scenario, which obviously isn't looking good. Many organisations and companies in this country will have net zero goals and targets, as well as an overall government one. And I wondered just how much leverage they provide, do you think, in helping caterers to look at more sustainable, probably plant-based menus?
Do you mean the sort of public sector targets?
Yeah, I mean,
Those ones.
NHS has an overall target, and trusts within the NHS will have their own, particular ones if they are ahead of the curve, so to speak. But do they provide any sort of leverage that caterers can use in terms of, perhaps forcing the pace of change in the menus that they provide?
Yeah, absolutely. I think targets are completely essential in terms of to drive that type of growth. And I think it's something that is difficult without a kind of set target to know exactly how to reduce by and what to reduce. So I think they're essential. And I think it's a real shame that the government hasn't gone for a national target on meat reduction. We saw in the National Food Strategy that a 30% target was recommended for kind of meat reduction, and the government has not tried to do that. I think it would be a lot more helpful if we had a kind of top-down target to go for. But I think it's great that we're seeing increasing councils trying to do that themselves, or more kind of grassroots movement to do so. And I think when you look at that 30% target, it gives you a nice kind of clear third goal to aim for, that you're trying to kind of reduce every kind of third meat-based meal to a plant-based protein one. So yeah, I think it would be really helpful for more places to take that up and to try and do it themselves.
Okay, thank you. Richard, your campaign this year for around National Vegetarian Week is very much focused on a sort of the environmental impact of things, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And as part of the campaign, we are putting out a national call for carbon labelling on food packaging and on restaurant menus. We've all got very used to seeing calorie information on menus that employ 250 FTEs or more, and I think for many people that's helpful. Giving people information, allowing people to make sustainable choices is good. It's only one part of it. There's never any silver bullet to this, is there? As Claire says, we do need some targets. We're badly missing direction from the top when it comes to government. And most governments will fight shy of introducing short-term targets because they're just hostages to fortune, and the political winds blow the wrong way, and you miss them. But when you've got the government's own food advisors like Henry Dimbleby suggesting we need to cut meat consumption by 30%, so we're not talking about CO2, we're talking about direct. How much meat do we eat? You've got their own climate change committee suggesting between 20 and 50% over the next decade and through to 2050. All of their advisors are just saying one thing: we need to eat less meat. And I think the public sector can take some comfort from that, actually, that ultimately, that it has to be a direction of travel. And Dimbleby himself says, if you have a couple of meat-free days a week on your catering menus, you're sort of at that 30% reduction anyway. So I think that's where we'd very much like to see the whole of the public sector, not just schools, universities, hospitals, prison service, particularly those areas that obviously where people are dependent on meals 3 times a day and aren't just dipping in and out as you might with hospitals, particularly in schools where reports suggest that 50% of nutrition for some school children comes from the school meal they have in the day. And so if we're going to introduce more plant-forward policies, we've got to make sure that this is not just about increasing the quantity of plant provision, it's increasing the quality of plant-based provision at the same time, and that's something we're very focused on.
Okay, thank you. Tony, perhaps if I can bring you in on this point. Does your school have any sort of policy in terms of trying to achieve net zero or decarbonize, and are the sort of the menus that you're producing seen as part of that strategy, if they do?
The school itself is always trying to do better things to decarbonise and net zero. Where the menus are concerned, because we're such a small team, there's myself and a team of 4. I'm doing all the buying and purchasing and procurement of everything myself. So it's important to me that I've got really good local suppliers that I can trust. And this means, yes, I have to put more hours in to make sure that I'm getting the correct items that I want. And it's important to me that I'm buying as much local and British as I possibly can. Yes, we are privileged where our food costs are perhaps higher than the average school. So that's an ongoing challenge to convince my boss and the school governors that this is good value for money, because at the end of the day, what we are putting on the hot plate is sustaining our students and giving them the energy to focus on the education that they need to be learning. Mm-hmm. So what I say, I focus on net zero and carbon, possibly, but with being such a small team, it's difficult, to be able to monitor exactly where things would meet those levels. So as I say, it's important that I have really good local suppliers, knowing that I'm buying fresh and British and supporting the local economy.
Yeah, I know, Tony, one of the things that gets talked about when people are discussing, calculating the carbon footprint of food and a menu, is that actually buying locally supports the local economy, and that there is a sort of a social value benefit to that, that's sort of part of the whole sustainability equation.
I'd certainly like to think so, because, for this last 20 years, I've been passionate about supporting local British farmers, and knowing that I can get my organic veg from Tadcaster, which is like 30 miles away from where I'm stopping. If I use my local wholesale fruit and veg butcher, which is 2 miles down in the village, sorry, not even 2 miles, 5-minute drive, and knowing that I've got fresh halloumi and other cheeses in the village, my eggs come from a mile away. So having all these local suppliers, producers, is great for us as a school. Not every school can do this, and that's mainly down to the cost effectiveness of how much money is being put into the school food costs. And as I said, we are quite privileged that ours is quite high. And I always am very aware when I'm buying and procuring new produce, what effect that might have on my budget.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Colette, if perhaps I can just sort of change tack slightly and come to you. You are involved in the school plates program, aren't you? And we know that schools have fairly tight school food standards. So how does putting more plant-based options onto school menus work in terms of managing to meet those nutrition standards? Is it more difficult or is it easier?
Well, it's a really good question. Basically, there's still a lot that schools can do within let's take the English school food standards. They can have 2 meat-free days. They've got to serve meat at least 3 days a week and dairy every day, as we know. So they can have those 2 meat-free days, and they could potentially have a plant-based option every day. So this is what we encourage any school that we're working with to do. We've just got our first big council who's moved to 2 meat-free days. We have a school that's moved to 2 plant-based days. So that shift is happening, but that's pushing the standards to the limit. In our experience, schools and school caterers want to go further, and they're coming to us saying, what are we allowed to do? So we then in turn go to the DFE and say, what are they allowed to do? Can they do this? Are they allowed to not do this? So I think it's the standards are quite ambiguous, and they're not really in line with the evidence out there from things like, the Climate Change Committee, the National Food Strategy, the IPCC reports. Everything is all kind of telling us the same thing. And I feel like the standards were set before we had a lot of this new information. From my perspective, it's definitely holding back school caterers. They want to do more. And I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see an acceleration of school caterers not sticking to those standards because they feel that they're out of date, and we should have a bit more guidance from above. So yeah, there's still lots that can be done, but definitely they're restrictive.
Okay, yeah, I take your point. Thank you for that.
No problem.
Moussa, if I could bring you in now with your sort of insight into the care sector. You are, as part of your program, you help to train chefs so that they can deliver the vegan and vegetarian options that you believe so passionately are important to people in care settings. How do you go about making sure that they are getting the nutrition they need? Because sometimes people, the elderly and vulnerable in care settings, can be at risk of malnourishment, can't they?
Yeah, and it's quite a complex thing, really. I guess there are quite a lot of dimensions even to that sort of simple question. So I guess the starting point again is kind of this idea of autonomy. People in care settings have lived, the bulk of their life now. That they're kind of, they're kind of in the last phase of life, I guess. So they kind of know what they like, they know what they want to eat, they know what they believe in. So I think it's really important to try and work with the grain of that. So listen to what people want. And I spoke to kind of one of the catering managers in one of the big care chains, and he kind of put it that one of the big warning signals for a person's health when they kind of enter this last phase of life is if they start to lose weight. And one of the best ways to stop someone losing weight is to give them food they want to eat. And that's actually quite, it sounds glib and almost banal, but actually a lot of people, something like 70% of people in care homes have got some form of dementia. So they might actually not be in a position to always communicate their preferences. They might need, so one of the things we work on is we use something called talking mats, which is a way of kind of getting into people's deep preferences. So you need to kind of tune into that, and another way of doing that is to have advocates, so people to give a statement of wishes, so we know what they want to eat, and that's a really important part. And that's not the chefs going in and doing that, but that's a big part of how we educate the care sector. But then sometimes people do need that bit of extra, so they need fortification in their meals, and we've actually kind of produced guidance for the care sector on plant-based fortification, because there's a sort of there's a way of doing things that typically involves using whey, sorry, terrible pun, but like to kind of fortify with dairy, but actually you can do it in a plant-based way. It's just, it needs a little bit of education, and so we've got guidance on that. But when our chefs go in and train, they also kind of talk about that. And then we focus a lot on simple swaps, so things that are not too asking the care establishment to kind of change 10 things all at once. You're saying within, what you cook, you do it in a certain way. These are a few tweaks you can make that will actually kind of give people what they want, nutrition they need, but you've got to kind of balance that with respecting what people want as well, because they kind of, you hold their beliefs and their life in your hands a little bit when you're catering for them round the clock. So it's important to kind of ensure that their autonomy is respected as well. So it's kind of quite a complex thing, really.
Yeah, sure. Okay. I wanted now to pick up on a question that's coming from someone who's watching. They say that the meat-free Mondays that they do at their schools, they're getting some pushback from parents on the basis that it is in some cases their sort of main meal of the day, and so there's this feeling that it should include meat. So Claire, perhaps I can bring you in on that one first of all.
Sure. Yeah. To that, I would say that I think we, in general, the kind of sector suffers from the idea that plant-based and vegetarian and vegan kind of alternatives are always inferior, or that it's lesser than. I think we need to move to a point where not having meat isn't regarded as missing out in any way. And I think that's a perceptions job, but I think it's also, we need to make sure that the food that we're creating is always kind of delicious and appealing, and people want to eat it, and it isn't seen as a kind of lesser than option. So I'd say it is a tricky one, and I think cost and people's circumstances we have to take into account, and we know it is difficult for people, and it's difficult for caterers at the moment as well. But I think we really need to always make sure that options are something people want to choose and look delicious and are appealing, and that's something that we're calling for with our campaign as well, Catering for Everyone. We don't just want an option, we want it to be absolutely appealing and nutritious, and something people want to eat and want to choose, and preferably more than one option, so they can choose and they can make a choice there. So that's what I'd say on that one.
So what you're trying to do is present it not as an alternative, but as this is good, a valid choice. Own right.
A great choice in its own right.
Sure. Okay. Richard, do you have any thoughts on that point? This idea that if it's to be a sort of solid, nutritious meal, and it's obviously a view that a number of people will have for better or worse reasons, and they feel it has to contain meat, or it's not, the full meal, so to speak.
Well, we talked about a younger generation, Gen Z, millennials coming through now, having a very different view to parents. Now I think there's a huge education piece to do with. I mean, this is clear just within a school setting, not the wider public estate, but there's a big piece for a school, I would say, to do in informing the parents, maybe not educating the parents, but you look at what happened with Jamie Oliver a few years ago when he tried to institute healthy foods into schools, and you had parents queuing up to push chips and pies because they were worried the children weren't getting the nutrition they need. So I think there's a piece to do with the school children, but a piece with the parents as well. I love the story about the school in Bonaldswick where they had decided to institute plant-based lunches, and when the parents found out, they were up in arms. What they didn't realise that the lunches had been in place for a year. Children hadn't raised any concerns. So I think what we've got to get across is that a meal isn't missing anything because it's not got meat. And we, the recipes that Tony alluded to earlier that he developed for the Vegetarian Society are a perfect example of, 3 terms worth of recipes, which they look great. They look like something children will want to eat, but the nutritional value is high as well. And I think that's something else to get across to parents, that if you're replacing meat, particularly with pulses and lentils and beans, which can be grown very well in this country, coming on to the sort of supporting UK farmers, if you can show parents that the protein content is just as good as the meat it's replacing, and there's a whole variety of other nutrients and micronutrients in there, then it's half the battle. I think there will be some, we've got to remember meat is so cultural in this country, isn't it? People of a certain generation have grown up eating it, and they don't understand. It's not to judge people, they just don't understand. If you take meat away, they still have these myths of the pasty grey vegan walking around with no energy. And the fellow speakers on this call will know that's a complete myth, but it still prevails. And so I don't think we should judge anybody, but I do think providing great information, great food photography, make the meals look fantastic, give parents the nutrition information, is a big part of the battle that we need to overcome. And that's actually not just in schools, that's across NHS, universities, and the wider public sector.
Yeah, I guess social media possibly has a part to play here. And Tony, I know that you are particularly active on social media, and you do a lot with photographing the dishes and that. Do you find that helps get parents on board?
I certainly do. Over the years, we developed our own Facebook page, and that was mainly, I was tired of parents contact me saying, my son, my daughter says there's nothing for them to eat on the hot plate. So I put a Facebook page just for catering in the school, and we photograph every meal that we do. And yes, we do change our menus on a regular basis. So we may change our menus every 6 to 8 weeks. And those are a 3-week cycle menu, and we photograph everything every Friday evening when most people are sitting down and relaxing. I'm at home uploading those photographs into the Facebook page, and we may have accidents happen in the kitchen where someone spills something. That photograph will go on there as well as a bit of fun, but the parents can actually see what is on the hot plate on a daily basis, so that they know that when their child comes home and says, oh, there was nothing to eat on the hot plate, they can see what was on that day. And because we are so proactive with that, and also my own Twitter page, it's sharing what we believe is best practice, supporting others with perhaps some ideas around vegetarian or vegan recipes, and allowing to see people to see that vegetarian choices and vegan choices can be appetizing, exciting, nutritious, and if you work really hard, you can get it in at a sensible price.
Great, thank you very much. Colette, now you mentioned in your introduction about the ProVeg introducing its sort of new awards accreditation scheme, if you like, which I guess sort of ties in a little bit with the whole idea of sort of promoting more plant-based options on menus. How important do you feel that is, alongside things like using Facebook and various other parts of social media?
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. It was something that's kind of evolved with our programme as we were working with councils and other school caterers, and they were asking, can we put your logo on our menus as a kind of seal of approval that this is a healthy and sustainable menu? So we looked to create this really and just make it something that's simple for caterers to follow. So the response has been really overwhelming. It's a massive driver to get people to change. I would say we have kind of, there's 23 actions, there's 6 actions to get to bronze, most of which are behavioural nudges. It's things about changing the positioning and the language and that kind of thing, using symbols instead of saying vegan or vegetarian. And probably typically a school caterer might do 2 or 3 of those things, and then wait till they have another menu come out 6 months later, and they'll perhaps change a few more. But now we're seeing all 6 things being done, and they're ready, and they send the menus back to be rescored and check our feedback again, because they want to get the award on the menu, and it's free and they don't really have to do anything. They just send it in and we do it for them straight away. So it's it's just an incentive. It's a way to say thank you for trying to take some positive steps, whatever they are. They don't need to be towards a bronze. They can be any of the actions that we suggest, whatever anyone's able to do. So I feel like we need to have these little rewards for positive behavior, as it were. It's all, anything we can do is good. So yeah, it's really working very well for us. So I would encourage anyone out there who wants to get involved, do get in touch and send us your menus, and we'll have a look and give you some feedback.
Lovely, thank you. Moussa, perhaps I can get you to give us a little bit of a perspective from the care sector, because obviously social media, I would imagine, is sort of less important. So how do you go about reassuring the relatives of people in care homes that not only are they getting the meals that they want, but they are getting the nutrition they need?
Yeah, so I guess it's almost the other way around, that where the relatives are kind of engaged, they're really supportive of the diets that they're kind of typically their parents say are following, and it's more the concern, is it being respected by the care home? And they but in terms of is it nutrition adequate? That much more often boils down to this idea that the older person, typically with dementia, is refusing food. And actually, when you kind of get to the bottom of that, it's often because they are being offered food that they don't actually want to eat. But it's kind of the communication within the care setting is quite difficult. So I think the road to sort of reassurance tends to lead through listening to the actual beliefs and desires of the care home resident, rather than kind of there is that place for fortification. It's really important, but it's typically about making sure that they have what they want to eat.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, there was a question that came up, and it was someone who was particularly interested to get some insight on feeding patients in hospitals. Richard, I noticed you were sort of responding to that. What were the concerns, and what were you able to tell them?
There was a question around provision in hospitals, and what I was sort of responding on is that the hospital estate is a complex area, clearly, because you're managing people with a wide variety of needs. And so I think from the top you would always say it's the clinician's view on what any particular patient needs, but from a broad spectrum point of view, when you're designing menus either for the staff canteen and the public canteens on the NHS estate, or broad menus for patients who aren't on specific restricted diets, there's a huge opportunity to increase the amount of plant-based food. You need to look at things like if you're using sort of alt meats, obviously fat, salt, sugar, and make sure that you're hitting dietary guidelines around that. But I think increasingly, we've talked about it before, pulses, beans, peas, lentils, great foods that you can introduce that have the bite and the texture of meat can be brought into very familiar dishes like cottage pie or a chili or a stew, and actually from a health and nutritional profile are fantastic, and that's really where we're sort of leaning into with our hospital-based training. The school team can offer training across any of the public sector estates, but we worked with two particular NHS trusts just recently, Halton and Preston. Went out on site to train their catering staff for the full day. There's a suite of recipes that they're then left with afterwards to develop themselves. These are based on catering portions. So I would say for anybody who's concerned around how you go about expanding plant-based choice in the NHS across all of the different food outlets, there's definitely support that we can offer in terms of coaching, nutrition advice, on-site training, and also, as I say, a suite of recipes as a leave behind. So the information's there. It's just a case of reaching out and sort of making that first contact.
Okay, thank you very much. Claire, another question that came up, and it was, what are the most important factors when catering with alternative proteins? And they sort of were saying, is it cost, is it nutrition, food safety, or the sustainability of those sorts of ingredients?
That's a great question, and I think all of those probably have to be taken into account to a certain extent in anything. But I would probably say with alternative proteins, generally speaking, they will be more sustainable than meats. So I think with that, you know, you kind of already hit that target, because as we've just been saying, you know, things like chickpeas, beans, lentils, peas all kind of have great both health and then sustainability benefits. So to a certain extent, if you're replacing with those type of replacements, then you are going to be getting those things already. So then it kind of comes to cost and taste, I would say, because especially at this point in time, the cost of living crisis, that has got to be one of the foremost considerations for everyone, I suppose. So that will, and I think especially in these settings with the public sector not having, you know, lots and lots of funding or lots and lots of budget, it's going to be a really key thing to think about. So that I would probably say that one, and then taste, because like I said before, if we aren't making it an appealing option, people aren't going to choose it. So that, yeah, I would say possibly above everything else has got to be the thing we focus on. We have to make sure that all the options we're giving people that are plant-based are delicious and appealing, as well as nutritious.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you. Colette, on the sort of school plates program, when you're talking to school chefs, are you able to sort of reassure them that they can reproduce the sort of dishes that you're talking about at a reasonable cost?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the big kind of considerations when we create recipes. We're mindful of availability of ingredients, and you know, that we're trying to use as many kind of whole foods, not processed, as possible, and that it has to be easy. And as Claire has said, it's got to taste good. This is basically about making delicious food, and it happens to be plant-based food. Yeah, so it's a huge factor. We go through and we cost everything that we're doing. We're trying to check what the kind of ingredients costs are as we're going along, because that varies hugely, obviously, with depending on who we're working with. But I think our average main course is about 54 pence, which is considerably cheaper than a lot of kind of animal product dishes. So yeah, we're constantly kind of, you know, it's a massive driver for people to do this, actually, even if they don't believe in the health benefits and getting the extra fiber and reducing the saturated fat and the impact it can have on the climate. Cost is definitely a big factor, and one we have to constantly bear in mind.
Sure, thank you. Tony, I know you said that you perhaps have a slightly better budget than many schools, but cost obviously still a big consideration. You're able to produce the menus that you do at a reasonable cost. The ingredients you need, they're not more expensive than sort of a meat alternative.
No, like as it's been said on various chats, that using more lentils, pulses, it makes it much cheaper. And adding vegetables to those, you can produce some fantastic meals. And it's just persevering with the students to get them to try and keep trying and keep trying. Like people laugh at me because I've a constant supply of teaspoons on the hot plate for students just to try whatever dish we put on. But you see, like at one time, students would eat pasta with tomato sauce, straightforward pasta pomodoro, and they'd love it. Introduce 5 different pulses to that tomato sauce, and the first reaction is, what is that? But then when they've tasted it and they realize, oh, it tastes virtually the same, but you've got 5 different beans in it. And pulses, so you're getting all those nutritions going into the food and they're loving it. But at the same time, it's reducing your costs because you're not having to put meat into it. And like some of the recipes that I've been tweeting out this week cost like 27 pence to produce a portion. So it's a case of, you know, putting your head down, working hard, producing stuff that you know will work if you persevere and work with the students. That the hardest thing is getting people to try something new. So going out into the dining room, giving samples out, going into the classrooms, giving samples out. It's all ways of encouraging students to try something new. So if they've tried it, when they come to the hot plate and they see it, you've more chance of winning them over to accept it.
Okay, that's lovely. Very inspirational note on which to end, because unfortunately we've run out of time. So my thanks to Richard, Colette, Moussa, Tony, and Claire, and to you for joining us. As we finish up today's webinar, you'll see a number of slides coming up with the logos of the sponsors who have supported Plant-Based Week, and we thank them very much. A special mention too to the Vegetarian Society and its own National Vegetarian Week, which is running now and finishes on Sunday. And in addition, it's worth mentioning that we've pulled together quite a lot of useful content on our Plant-Based Week webpage, including some cooking demos, resources you can use to promote plant-based dishes, as well as articles and stories highlighting some of the best practice that is happening across the public sector. And I encourage you to take a look at that. That's all for us. Thank you once again to our panelists. Thank you and goodbye.